All right, Dr. Mike Israetel, you've changed your mind on a few things. Maybe not wide open out there saying, like, I've changed my mind on this, but when we get to talking, there's a few things you feel are pivoted your stance on. Anyone with any scientific rigor in their life kind of changes their mind on stuff from time to time, or at least evolves.
Yes.
Let's just jump right into it. What are some things you've pivoted on?
Nothing at all. I'm perfect, and I knew everything from the start. Next question.
I knew it.
Wait, no, hold on. There's got to be something, right? When you first hit me up about this, I did say that I don't keep mental notes of what I have changed my mind on, because I just want to keep my mental sort of map of what I know onto the things I know and not the wrong things I don't think about anymore. But then per your request to have this discussion, I was like, there's absolutely things I changed my mind on, because exactly to your point, if you're scientifically minded, it's unlikely that you're correct on a first guess on everything. And also the literature evolves. So there's a couple things I can think of.
I thought you had hair. I was wrong about that.
I don't know where you got that idea. Very old thumbnails, maybe. In any case, my balding and depression aside.
So that link down below gets you a free sample pack of LMNT electrolytes with any purchase. So they have some that are 0 calorie, the others are 5 calories. So technically they're totally fine on a ketogenic or any kind of diet. But the best part about them is there's something that you can drink and it will sort of make it so you're not hungry. So their grapefruit salt is, I can't even tell you. It's amazing. The grapefruit salt, the citrus salt, they have a variety of different chocolate flavors that they release here and there for the seasons that you can drink hot. 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Have 1 or 2 of those suckers a day during your workout, whatever. It is a game changer, and you'll probably find yourself eating less as well. So that link is down below, drinklmnt.com/Thomas.
One thing I used to believe, based on an examination of literature at the time, was that fasting potentiated longevity, which means that if you include fasting intervals in your life, you're going to meaningfully extend your healthy lifespan. And I think that is still true, with the caveat of the fact that it's the lower overall caloric consumption through the day that accomplishes almost all, if not 100% of that effect. The autophagy benefits, the glycemic benefits, they seem to occur in a very notable way when you're taking long fasting intervals, which is awesome and super effective. But if you have 4 meals throughout the day, for example, they're just smaller meals and you still generate a caloric deficit. It's that act of losing body fat and losing total mass that extends longevity to a really high degree. So nowadays, used to be when folks ask me, hey, like, I'm trying to do fasting for longevity, I'll say that's a very good idea. And there seems to be some kind of special benefit there. Now what I'll say is, if fasting is something that meets your lifestyle goals, like, sometimes just eating is annoying and you just go 16 hours without eating. Some people with some caffeine and something, they're actually a little bit more clear-headed in that regard. And they like to eat a lot more of their calories at night with their family. I don't have a family. I have no one to go to, no one to love me, no one to call me my own. But other people that have families, sometimes they like to do that, and that's totally cool. But what I'll say is, if you just like to eat well-balanced meals, if you lose some weight and lose some body fat, you'll develop almost all, if not all, the longevity benefits as well with that sort of approach. So really, like, TLDR, you'll live a long time if you're not a fat pig that overeats like me. So you've got some life in you still. Me, I'm years away, maybe months from the big one.
I still overeat a lot, man.
Never mind. See you in hell.
No, it's, do you think that, I mean, when you talk about autophagy, all kinds of stuff like that, I try to, like, get this across, but it's really difficult sometimes when you have a lot of my audience is very fasting minded, because I've done a lot of content surrounding that. But trying to, even when I had like Dr. Tommy Wood on, trying to explain that like exercise induces autophagy.
Yes.
What is it? A 60-minute bout of 50 to 60% of your VO2 max initiates 2 to 3 times as much autophagy as a 24-hour fast, right?
That's an interesting statistic.
Yeah, and that's not to say that obviously fasting isn't a great way to go about it. I just think it needs to be another tool in the toolbox that people cycle through or whatever.
Yes, and some people take to fasting really well. It just fits their je ne sais quoi. You know, like they like the restriction, they like the timing element, they like the eating more later in the evening. But for some other people, they really do need a consistent input of nutrients 4 or 5 meals through the day to kind of feel normal. Like for me personally, if I skip 6 or 7 hours of eating, I'm like hungry in a way that you can't talk me down off of it. Like they're not like, it'll pass in an hour. I'm like, it'll pass when I have Wendy's French fries sticking out of my mouth. Then I just run to Wendy's. It doesn't matter where I am in this world, Wendy's. But on a serious note, some people just live better with multiple daily meals. And we don't want those folks to feel left out of the benefits of what I would call creating a deep calorie sink on occasion. So exercise does something very similar to long-term fasting, which is it takes a lot of the nutrients in your blood, the same nutrients that make sure all your cells are well taken care of. But if the nutrients are there at high levels all the time, it kind of cooks your body in a brine of excess nutrient. And that is absolutely going to reduce lifespan and it increases inflammation, does these other bad things. Like a chronically slightly elevated blood glucose is good for no one. Fasting, a caloric diet that's constrained, but 4 meals a day, and like you said, in a big way, exercise, take all those nutrients or a huge fraction of them and just clear them right out of the blood. Fasting is because, well, your cells just take all of them up because they're starving to death. A low-calorie diet, the cells occasionally take up more because you're just not eating enough food. And then with exercise, obviously, the exercise makes your muscles super sensitive to taking in nutrients from the blood, and it just zaps all that nutrient in your muscles. What ends up happening is you enter into a low nutritive state in your bloodstream, and that state is, by definition, unsustainable because you're going to die if you have that long enough.
Yeah.
You know, people starving to death in Africa have that for months and then they die, right? But having that state for short periods of time promotes autophagy and promotes like 50 other awesome health markers, clearing a lot of stuff. Your brain starts working a little better again. And then when you eat food, obviously, if you just continue to eat and eat forever, bad things happen. So it's pairing periods of eating and nutrition and sort of nourishment with periods of relative deprivation. That deprivation in context has a big health and longevity upside. And so one of the ways you can describe the American obesity epidemic, the chronic overfeeding of just people nutrients in the blood all the time. And that leads to all sorts of not great things. Obviously, people with no nutrients in the blood all the time die of starvation sooner or later. But if you strike some balance between those two and that balance ends up having you at a healthy weight, then it's a really, really good thing for your metabolic health.
Yeah. When you're in the state of chronic overnutrition, any nutrient in isolation is ultimately going to be detrimental, right?
Sure.
Like you could say, okay, you're in this hypercaloric state, huge surplus all the time. Okay, sugar at that point is going to be detrimental. Saturated fat at that point is going to be detrimental.
Yes.
Everything in the state of overnutrition. I can't think of anything. Is there anything in the state of overnutrition that you could think of that would actually be additive or beneficial besides additive in the way of adipose tissue?
Oh, additive, unlikely.
Yeah.
You could say protein, but that's not really over. If you train with weights, your protein demand goes up. Yeah. So you're not in protein overnutrition, I would say, in that case. I think, yeah, everything has to be sort of in balance. And interestingly enough, sometimes people will go a little too far on the low carb stuff. And they'll say, well, diabetes is a carbohydrate-mediated phenomenon. And it's actually quite curious because if you look at almost every single of the rat and mouse studies that purposefully put rats and mice into type 2 diabetes, they'll almost always use a diet exclusively just high in saturated fat. Everything's normal, saturated fat is high. Yeah. And that'll throw people through a loop because how do they get diabetes? Overnutrition. Yeah. You oversaturate the system and it's like, let's go diabetic.
Even some Roy Taylor's work, stuff like that. I mean, you look at it still like using saturated fat just to drive that up. It's not that I'm even the biggest fan of Roy Taylor, but I mean, it's like even in these multiple different situations you look at, it's almost always initiated with saturated fat. And I've created a lot of enemies talking about that coming from the low carb space and being like, hey guys, wait a minute. Anything in the state of overnutrition, we look at saturated fat, it arguably is worse when it comes down to insulin resistance.
Oh, yes.
And
that's why it's dependable to use in an animal study. Yeah. 9 times out of 10, the animals are going to respond, become diabetic.
Do you think it's also just because there's a lot of just independent response to glucose, like epigenetically or even in different cases, like how active the mice are? It's just because like glucose is so highly variable based on activity, whereas saturated fat, maybe not as much.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Another thing is it's just easier and cheaper for them to stuff the rat's food full of saturated fats than to sprinkle glucose on it or something like that. True. I think both are fine, but maybe the rats like the fat a little more and it's easier to get them to eat it. Although I think they like sugar just fine. They like anything if you feed them enough.
I like sugar too. But
yeah.
I think I like fat more.
If you think about it, what is the formula by which you make a food tastier if you don't care about nutrition? Increasing the sugar content, the fat content, and often the salt content. And all of those things in excess are quite bad for you. But we're all humans evolved from an environment, the Paleolithic environment, where it just wasn't a lot of food around. And so you found something with any combination of sodium and fat and excess carbohydrate and you were like, holy crap, this is how I'm going to survive. You take a humanity that was nearly starved its entire evolutionary history and you expose it to supermarkets and fast food places. It's just quite logical. Everyone's going to get really, really fat from that chronic overnutrition that feels so goddamn good. The thing about low carb folks, they're onto a lot of wisdom. Low carb can absolutely be a healthy way to live your life. But the demonization of fat and saying, look, as long as you stay away from carbs, you can eat damn near anything you want and you'll be totally fine. It's just wrong. Yeah. And if you make up for it by eating a crap load of saturated fats, you're back in the same problem. Like it's always the one guy, like some guy will be like 150 pounds overweight, and he'll be like, yeah, I'm doing keto again just to make sure, get myself all cleaned up, metabolically. And you're like, good luck. You have 150 pounds to lose. How you lose that, it's not really relevant. When you do become leaner, you'll have all the health benefits. I think there's some people thinking that, it's the carbohydrates that do the bad thing. It's not the fats. And as long as I have a very low carbs, I'll be okay. It's the keto ladies at the restaurant that are pouring cheese and ranch dressing all over their salad. And you're like, okay, fine. This is not going to work.
No, I'm with you, man. I mean, it's just like, for me, I felt good on keto. That was it. I felt clear. Maybe I responded to it
Same
better.
Here.
Maybe for me, I'm a very black and white person when it comes to nutrition, and it was just easier for me to just eliminate a macronutrient, trim my calories that way. It worked,
Yeah.
And but yeah, there's definitely, any which way you spin it. If you're going to pour 700 calories of ranch dressing on a salad,
there's not a diet in which that's a really good idea in most cases.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the next one.
Yes. So I used to think that there was some kind of really clear additive advantage from expanding meal frequency into very high levels. So for me, I thought 7 meals a day was better than 6 meals, was better than 5, was better than more, was for sure better than 3. And then a lot of literature came out since then, and a lot of physiological rationale that I just hadn't considered, I'll describe it in just a second, leads me now to believe that I was wrong. And it hurts me to admit that. I'm kidding. 4 meals a day seems to be both the bottom limit of what is effective for maximum muscle hypertrophy eating, but also not as it just the bottom limit, which is to say that you can poke a few theoretical and practical holes in 3 meals a day. If someone said 3 meals a day is totally enough meals to eat to maximize your muscle growth potential and your muscle retaining potential in a fat loss diet, then they could be criticized on the margins. And you would say, 4 meals a day probably offers some advantage, but 5 may offer no advantages over 4, outside of practical concerns. Like, I just like to eat 5 times a day. Fine. But I used to think like 6, 7 meals, and I used to purposefully eat my meals smaller so that I could have more meals because I thought this was somehow going to supply the muscle growth machinery better. But it turns out if you have meals that are larger in size, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and there's more protein, more fat, more carbs, that whole mix digests more slowly. And it ends up leaching from your GI tract into your bloodstream at roughly the same rates that 7 meals a day. You could have 1,100 meals per day, which means you take a bite of some kind of protein bar that supplies all your nutrients every minute or something like that all day long, just total grazing. And that has no additive benefits as opposed to 4 meals a day, because what you do is you eat 4 meals worth or 1 meal's worth of that. It sits in your GI tract. It gets mixed around by your stomach, gets secreted into your intestines, and then it gets out of your intestines at the same rate that it would if you were putting 1 down every minute, or if you stored all of them here and they just get ejected 1 every minute from your intestines into your bloodstream. So it turns out the extremes of high meal frequency just neither theoretically nor practically ever made a big difference. And to me, this was a big relief to find out and to change my diet with, because I started experimenting with myself and I was like, let's see if I can detect any real world results difference if I start eating 4 meals a day versus my previous 7. I did it for some time, months, and I was like, training is going about the best it's ever gone. And here's something I'll say. When people start to use steroids, for example, if they have to ask, so how do I know it's working? They have fake steroids. Because something like that is so real that you can tell after a few weeks, like, it's happening. Same idea for like, if you're running, let's say, and you try a warm-up technique or drill. If you feel it in the run, like, whoa, I feel better, it works. If you don't feel it, maybe it works, maybe not. And so what I did was I went from 7 meals a day to 4 meals a day. And I was like, if 4 is notably worse, I'll see it in some. I measure everything quite carefully about my body, my strength, lean body mass, blah, blah, blah. And after 6 to 9 months, I was like, the trajectory of my gains was the same that it had been with 7 meals all the way through 4. And I was like, this is way more convenient. And the last thing I'll say is there's a decent analogy for how 7 meals and 4 meals works against one another. If you are on a road trip and you want to make sure your gas tank is full, do you fill it up when it's a quarter tank, or do you fill it up when it's, let's say, 3/4 of a tank? Well, if you're 3/4 of a tank, you're filling it up every time, the people in the back seat are going to be like, why the hell are we stopping all the time? Do you need to pee often? You're like, just making sure the gas tank is full. They're like, yeah, I think you're nuts though, because it would be full for another 3 hours if you didn't have to stop. So eating 9 times a day or whatever kind of people get on is similar to like filling up every time you have 3/4 of a tank from full. It's like, geez, you could stop at the gas station and fill up, but why? And some people say like, yeah, man, I got, it's tough. Bodybuilding's tough. I got to eat 7 meals a day. And it's like, but you don't have to eat 7 meals a day. You're choosing to do that. Now, some people get so big and their gastrointestinal system is concomitantly so small, it's just physically uncomfortable for them to eat 4 meals a day, because each meal might be like 1,250 calories if you're eating 5K calories a day. And you just maybe like, dude, I don't want to feel that full, because sometimes you eat that many calories or breathing heavy. So for those people, practically, 6-7 meals a day is fine. But 4 meals a day is, in my analogy, kind of like filling up when you have a quarter tank. You start looking for gas stations on the freeway and you got a quarter tank of gas, you're going to be A-okay. There's never going to be a time there's not fuel in your car. Just like if you eat 4 times a day, there's never going to be a time your muscles are starving for amino acids and they're just not getting them.
Do you think it's the same with protein, given, the Cell Report study that came out in December, the whole thing that everyone's been talking about?
I don't actually know how to read physically, so I don't read Cell.
Okay, you want me to explain it to you?
Please. I just want you to explain letters and how they map onto sounds. That would be great.
That's perfect. So, essentially the 100-gram bolus of protein.
Oh, that whole thing, yeah.
Obviously, the biggest caveat, the biggest sort of concern, if you want to call it that, with that study is it was casein. So it was something that was going to...
it was milk protein.
It was going to digest pretty slow. Yeah. So, okay, that's all fine and dandy. That study's, it's pretty interesting and it opened my eyes to a couple things. But at the end of the day, it's also nothing super new. We know casein digests really slow.
Yes. I don't know why that study's news exactly to that point. Yeah.
So, but if you were to do that with whey protein, for instance... Yes. Would the same situation that we were just describing and talking about apply? If you had something that was rapidly digesting, so if you ate 5 bites of steak every 10 minutes throughout the course of the day, slower digestion. But if you had 20 grams of whey protein that's absorbing really quick every 15 minutes, you think you'd run into a different situation?
Yes, that's a very, very good point. So when I say 4 meals a day, I mean mostly mixed meals. They're called in the literature, which means some combination of protein, carbs, and fats in every meal. And the protein spread roughly evenly through each meal. So it's a lot of protein. And the protein normally is like meat protein or something like that, milk protein. So it digests relatively slowly to begin with. Then you pair it with carbs and fats, it digests even slower. So it's titrating amino acids to you rather smoothly the entire day. If you had only whey protein, as some kind of sick joke, then, that's all you get today, then you would have to ingest probably 7 to 9 boluses for it to always make sure that you're getting enough protein. That's how you get a little wacky inference from just kind of scholastic studies on a subject. So you get a bunch of recreationally trained undergrads together, you get some cool machinery that can measure muscle protein synthesis rates. And just for the purposes of keeping everything clean and tidy for research, you want an exactly weighed and measurable laboratory verified protein source. You're not going to go get chicken from Chipotle down the street. That's weird. You're going to have a whey protein shake for the subject to consume. And then they say, whey protein's, anabolic window is really just only about 3 hours, and maybe even 2 in some cases. So after you drink a shake of 40 grams, 2 hours later, your bloodstream is completely bereft of amino acids as if you had never eaten anything at all, because it just runs through really quick. And someone could say, look, so every 2 or 3 hours, then you should be eating 7 to 8 times a day. Yes, if you just drink whey protein shakes, 7 to 8 times a day is a great idea. Marginally more beneficial than 4, for sure. But when we talk about eating, mostly we talk about real meals. And that's something that when people read an abstract or a really quick hot take about an article, and they don't zoom into the specifics, you can conclude a lot of really wacky stuff. You could say, you could ask someone, hey, what's the hardest you can turn your car and still not flip it over? and they look up a study and it says like, oh, dude, you can do 9Gs, no problem. But the study was on formula cars with professional drivers. They just didn't see that part. And so they see car, and they go, okay, let's take mom's minivan and not flip it over. Of course, you flip it over, mom gets pissed. So kind of the same idea works there, where if we zoom into the studies, most of them are done on whey protein. People take those studies and they go, let's conclude about meal frequency generally. Those aren't meals. Those are whey protein shakes. And if you do take those in, yeah, hell yeah, that's how it works. But if you have mixed meals, protein, carbs, and fats, veggies, fruits, like that, steak, chicken, etc., those take hours and hours and hours and hours to get through processing. So you can eat a meal and 6 hours later, you're just getting to the tail end of the secretion of amino acids, or the transfer the aminos from your intestines into your bloodstream. And so your muscles are being still fed quite well. So if you eat every 5 or 6 hours, you're golden, and you don't have to eat every 2 like you would with whey protein shakes.
No, beautifully said. All right, what's next?
Yes. So I used to be an adherent to full range of motion. I actually have a little company on the side of RP called Team Full ROM.
The other company? You have another company.
And my company has another company. And that company has another company.
Oh, the other company we can't talk about on the internet, though.
Well, there's a few of those.
Okay.
Donald Trump was nice enough to fund a few of them for me, but I'm not supposed to say that. I have a lot of companies. In any case, Team Full ROM is what it's called, full range of motion, because the way we saw it a few years ago was that if you weren't going all the way up and down, mostly you were just being an egotistical idiot, and you could get all these benefits from doing full range of motion. And I think that's still largely correct. However, we're finding out now that not all parts of the range of motion are created equal. And it turns out that the bottom third of a range of motion, equated for forces, equated for total work, equated for reps, volume, all that stuff, compared to the top range and most of the muscles they've actually examined, the bottom range is better. It just causes like 10% more hypertrophy. Now, 10% is not the whole world. So can you finish your curls here? Definitely. It's good for variation. If you do any kind of sport, you want functional fitness, you should probably be doing a full range of motion most of the time, because the world is going to demand that of you when you do your sport. But that bottom lengthened position is a little bit more hypertrophic. So maybe on a chest fly, for example, squeezing at the top here isn't so important and might cost you a little bit of energy you could have used for that deep stretch at the bottom. So if you really accentuate that deep stretch, and then when you come up to the top, you just clink and go back down, it's probably a little better than if you don't go super deep, you kind of come to here, and then when you do chest press, you hold and squeeze the middle fibers together, and that might not be as advantageous.
That's just an ego thing, really. I mean, it is. Come on. You're like when people are squeezing here. It's like, I used to think that, and then I was like, nah, I just like to look at my chest.
Yeah.
I just like to look at that.
And if there's no mirror, I'm not doing
Exactly.
it. If there's no cute girls or boys in the gym, I'm not doing it, because what the hell am I doing? I'm not impressing anybody. So yeah, a lot of that's for sure ego. Yeah. What it kind of feels like it's doing something, which look, going by feel is a great start to trying to organize your lifting plan. But you go in the literature and you're like, okay, there's 2 different kinds of feels. There's the feel of me squeezing my muscles at the top, which is cool, might cause some growth. And there's the feel of my muscles being stretched and expanded beyond the brink at the bottom. That last feel actually corresponds to more muscle growth. Yeah. So chase the deep stretch instead of chasing that peak contraction more of the time, and you'll get the better results. And so I used to always be a fan of the deep stretch, but now I'm an even bigger fan of it, to the point where if someone's like going down on a chest machine and then not locking out and coming back down for the deep stretch, I'm like, that's good technique. Whereas before I'd be like, why aren't you locking out? They're just trying to avoid the work. But nowadays, skipping that lockout, not a big deal. If you're targeting the chest, it can work even better than locking out.
The lockout can be a rest too sometimes. It's totally. It's like a lot of times I would find like, oh, lockout, and actually subconsciously I'm actually just getting a rest.
Yes,
like
especially on a machine or something.
Like,
yes,
okay.
Yeah, the skull crusher, you can hold it there for forever. So they actually did a study back in the day where they didn't allow people to lock out the skull crusher, and even the mid-range group got really better hypertrophy than the people that locked out, and I guess it was because they were resting at the top. Now, if you rest at the top, you're buying yourself more reps. So if you go to the same degree of failure, you'll get more reps because you rested. So you can rest at the top and get just as much hypertrophy, if not more, but you have to take that rest pause effect. So if you're locking out and someone's like, do you have more? And you're like, you just rack it because you still did 10, just like when you didn't lock it out. But now you're like, no, I do have more. And you get to 14 total. And then it's the same amount of hypertrophy, but the same hypertrophy as in a not locked out condition, but with more time invested.
I was going to say, nobody got time for that.
100%. I'm not even trying to lift. I'm so busy. My butlers have private plane ready for me. I'm jetting off to somewhere fancy.
All right,
Where's some
Dan
fancy?
Bilzerian.
Yeah, Dan and I are acquainted. We're friends.
so am I.
Call him every now and again. He calls me. I screen his calls usually.
Really? He called me at like I was in Hawaii, and he called me at like 11 p.m. when I was.
Oh, you're not kidding.
In Hawaii?
No. I've never interacted with Dan Bilzerian. I'm just making things up.
He called me at it was 11 p.m. Hawaii time.
Excellent.
So which would have been 1 a.m. I'm like, what?
Yeah. And he's up at all hours.
I've known him for a while, and like and my wife knows I know Dan. I'm happily married with my wife for 19 years, but I know I've helped him with some stuff on the nutrition side. And like I'm like, what the heck are you calling? And he texts me back. He's like, I'm in a debate. I'm like, I've got to. Anyway, this is funny. He was in some
I love it.
BS nutritional debate that was just. I mean, he must have been drinking or something like that. Dan, you're watching this. You know it's true. Yeah, it's just like, what the heck's going on here?
Damn, I need to get on that private plane shit.
I flew on it once.
On his private plane?
Yeah, from LA to Vegas. It was pretty cool. You don't sit on the couch or the mattress
because there's fluids.
I'm sure
There have been fluids.
I'm sure he steam cleans it, but
some things morally you can't get out of a couch. Things have happened before.
Correct.
The ladies and whatever else happens on that private plane.
Yeah,
Never can tell. There was that, what was that, one of the Thor movies? They stole one of the spaceships to get out, and they're like, this is actually his pleasure cruise. They're like, what does that mean? They're like, he hosts orgies on it. They're like, ooh, touch anything.
Yeah, don't
touch the controls with one finger at a time. All right. More of me being wrong.
All right. What's number 4?
Number 4 is the Glycemic Index. I used to be a big fan of the Glycemic Index because I think it's a very cool theoretical tool to show how fast blood sugar rises after a certain amount of carbohydrate from a meal. And I think that absolutely has implications for people timing their diabetic drugs. For example, insulin, injectable insulin is a very good to know glycemic index. But what I ended up learning later on was that when you have a mixed meal, again, this whole thing keeps coming up, mixed meals with proteins and carbs and fats in them, and oftentimes veggies, and why not a drink? Though the digestion rates of everything in the meal get really skewed. And what ends up happening is, let's say you have something like white rice in a meal. And people say like, that's kind of like sort of high, moderate, high glycemic. And like, why would you eat that? It like blood sugar rushes into you and kills you and hurts your children, all this other stuff. And then you pair that with some steak. You pair that with a little bit of peanut sauce, healthy peanut sauce, avocado-based, peanut-based peanut sauce. I don't know how you make that. Some veggies. And all of a sudden, that entire concoction, if you measure the glycemic index of that rice in the context of that meal, it's like lower than oatmeal by itself by a long shot. It's is super, super low glycemic. And all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, this is now a low glycemic food. And thus the glycemic index for rice by itself, it doesn't tell me much unless I'm eating rice by itself. And if you're just eating a bowl of white rice, I feel like someone needs to come up and give you a hug because imagine that's all you have.
I mean, you could go white rice and whey protein isolate and just have like
mix it in there.
Rapid.
Boom. And that, like, look, before a bodybuilding show, 2 hours before, if you want the full
rice
pump
cakes,
going,
right?
Rice cakes or even white rice with some sweetened condensed milk, some whey protein, it gets in there, boom, and does the shit quick.
But what's funny is backstage, you'll see people. So obviously the puffed rice, I mean, you're basically taking these starch chains and making, independent glucose molecules essentially. But then what do the freaking bodybuilders put on? Almond butter. I'm like, you're defeating the purpose.
I think a lot of guys are just in such a starved state that they'll eat anything tasty because they're like, nothing matters. I'm filling out or some stupid like that. I saw a guy eating a cheesecake with like a spoon out of the cheesecake. Like he had the pie tin backstage. He was just eating it. And I was like, that's more just for the soul than anything else.
I saw Panda Express once. I thought that was an interesting choice. But I mean, guy looked okay. So
well, look, a lot of guys look okay and they do dumb shit all the time. So
what's your take in that case? I mean, there's not a lot of concrete data on it, but this entire discussion warrants the question of what about the potential of the Randall cycle? Do we have any, like, if you take in carbs and fats in a surplus, or not even a surplus, but in a high amount, does the mitochondria preferentially prefer one fuel over the other if you take in a bunch at one time?
It's dependent on a lot of context. Yeah. It's also which mitochondria and which cell.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you can wiggle it any way you like. Your metabolism is two things. One, very adaptive It'll change for you based on conditions, especially with the gut microbiome changing after a few weeks. People say like, I can't eat protein bars. They blow me up. Keep eating them. A week later, they're like, turns out I can have all the protein bars I want. My poop's back to normal. It's because your gut bacteria got used to it. Your cells often get used to a lot of stuff. So that's fact number one. Fact number two, the overall total caloric surplus you generate for the week, it doesn't matter how fancy you get. Eating carbs and fats by themselves, eating protein alone, pairing foods. If you're still overeating, you get all of the negative health and body composition downsides. If you are undereating or eating in such a way that maintains your healthy weight, you can pair any food you want with any other, and it has essentially no impact on your mitochondrial health or any of that long term. Almost all of that, if not all of it, comes from, again, bathing your body in that soup of excess calories. Doesn't matter how they're generated. If you're gaining weight and fat over time, there's no way to slice it that it ends up being like, well, pairing this and that, digestion, mitochondria, blah, blah. That all stuff just goes completely down the drain. It's like watching someone, I'll just pick on someone, like a sorority girl, like not eat anything all day and then do a ton of cardio. Thanks, cocaine. And then you're like, so, that's your secret. You're like, to getting leaner. And she's like, totally, I'm going to lose tons of weight. And then after she gets drunk that night on 18 beers worth of calories, she has like half a pizza and passes out. Like, that's not a fat loss day. Even though most of the time of the day was spent in a very fat loss type of condition, she made up for it later. Yeah. So I don't think there's much wiggle room with that kind of stuff, unfortunately. Or fortunately, because like, you can think of a lot of complexities, and people ask me questions like this all the time. For example, I was at a hangout with my parents once. Again, like I said, no friends. And my parents are Russian immigrants, so am I. And a lot of their friends are like older Russian Jewish people. This is generally very smart people, but on the nutrition side, I don't want to say they'll fall for any scam. They just have no idea how to parse information because they're not educated in that. So one lady is like, I know kind of how to get in shape. I know what the secret is to health. And I was like, do tell. And she's like, it's eating carbs and fats by themselves. And I was like, okay, explain. And she's like, if your gut is only optimized for burning or for assimilating one type of nutrient versus another, digesting it. If you eat carbs by themselves, your body digests them better. And if you eat fats by themselves, that digests them better. And then that makes you leaner and all that other stuff. And I was like, so if something is getting digested poorly, you actually poop it out and you can get really lean because you never incorporate it. So wouldn't your diet of enhanced digestion lead to more weight gain? And of course, this was a galaxy brain moment for her. And she was like, wait, no. Oh, no. Hold on. And I was like, whoever told you to do this didn't think it through. Any combination of food you eat, generally speaking, is going to have largely the same long-term effect if the calories and general health value of the food are adjusted for.
That's interesting, man.
Yeah. Which is, I guess, a good news because you can try to get really complicated with diet. People do all the time. They're going to have all these rules for themselves. I eat this, but not that. I eat this and not that. If you eat a diet high in nutritive content, veggies, fruits, whole grains, plenty of lean meats or lean proteins if you're vegan, and you monitor your caloric load such that you're not becoming a giant fat piece of shit or not withering away into, this will date me, but what was her name? Kate Moss, modeled back in the 90s, now very skinny. If you're not in any one of those directions, that's how you find your best health. And it's just that simple. And, like I run a company that gives out nutrition advice. We have an app and everything, and we could like lie to people and say like all this weird complexity matters. It's good that it doesn't because it means good nutrition is accessible to almost all people in a very simple template. The problem is, are people gonna do that? Man, I don't know. Taco Bell tastes pretty good. Yeah. And any combination you get
Taco Bell's what you choose?
You heard me.
Did I stutter? All of that, you choose
well, what's your choice?
I mean, I got fat on Jack in the Box. That was
Jack in the
translucent
Box.
tacos.
Isn't there like a Crave case or something? No, there's some kind of like little munchie meal.
Yeah, I don't know what they have anymore. I have to stay away.
I'm not allowed.
I'm legally required to stay away.
That's a good idea. Good idea. So in any case, the glycemic index, here's another thing, another way the glycemic index plays in. If you claim that high glycemic index foods are bad for your health, but you also claim that thus the corollary is that low glycemic foods are good for your health, you got a problem because pizza, ice cream, pasta, done right with some sauce and some meat, and some cheese, a lot of cheese, cheesecake, cookies, those are all low glycemic foods. Yeah. chocolate milk is a low glycemic food. What? Because it has like 12 grams of fat per cup. That much fat is going to, fat brings the glycemic index down so much because it slows digestion, absorption, or release of carbohydrates so much. Fiber, protein, it's a done deal. Ice cream is a low GI food. So you'll watch someone order sushi, and because they're on a diet and they're trying to be healthy or whatever, they're like, can I get like brown rice sushi? Because like white rice is like, I heard like a podcast that it's like awful for you. And you're like, yeah, wow, Betty's so healthy. It's low glycemic. And then later you're like, do you want some ice cream? She's like, I don't eat that stuff. It's like glycemic stuff. You're like, that's lower glycemic than brown rice. And then you watch Betty like try to with that in her head. And she's like, I don't know. No, ice cream's still bad. And it's like, the only thing bad about ice cream is the fact that it is so tasty and has so many calories that you're prone to overeat it. Yeah. If you had a spoonful of ice cream here and there, nobody would see no cardiometabolic downsides. But, pint of Ben & Jerry's that's a size for a reason. It's for you, your couch in your living room, Netflix, and loneliness. Yep. And you're going to eat the whole thing. Have you ever not finished a pint of Ben & Jerry's?
It's been a long time since I've been at Jerry's, but this stuff is like the Cherry Garcia one. That's like always my jam.
That's it, man. One pint for one man. Yeah. Or if you're very sad and have a very lonely evening, 3 pints for one.
I eat a half a bar of chocolate a day at least. I mean, it's like, I know that's not that much, but.
What kind of chocolate?
Depends. I'll eat any and all chocolate.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Okay. I thought you were going to go on this chocolate snob of like, cacao reserve 82%. It's only from this one field in Colombia.
Heavy metals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Trying to get as many heavy metals as I can through my chocolate.
I'm trying to figure a good way to put weight on if I have heavy metal in me.
Listen, it's just straight up logic at that point. Yeah. Do you want to be big or not? Uranium weighs a lot. Here you go. Now you're made of more uranium.
All right, number 5.
Number 5. So I developed this concept, or really named already concept out in the world, like I say, and invented it, called maximum recoverable volume. And it's just a theoretical nod, like hat tip or milady, to the idea that your body's ability to recover from training is finite at any one given point. Now, it changes over time and stuff like that. But there's a certain amount of training you cannot throw at your body because it will exceed its ability to recover. And at that point, you do that chronically, you're engineering an environment where you don't get gains, you get losses. I used to wrestle, for example. And there was a saying in wrestling when I was coming up that was like, however hard your opponent is working, you outwork them. And like later I examined that through a more scientific lens. It's like, what if my opponent is working almost to their limits of recovery? And let's say we have similar limits. And I work 1.5 times harder. Won't I be going beyond my own ability to recover? Yes. Is that a good thing? No. Like if you have an office building, which people can fix at a certain rate, and it's in a storm, windows getting broken, blinds flying out. If the storm is gnarly enough and the workers can't keep up, the office building just degrades more and more until it's useless. You can in fact do that to your muscles. You can do that to your whole body. You're from the ultra running world. People overtrain. That's a real thing. If someone in the ultra running community told you, yeah, man, just trying to get as many miles as possible, you'd be like, what? You must just not go that hard, because at some point your body's like, nope, you got to take some light days, or the knees are coming off, the ankles are going to break apart, the whole thing goes. Your performance, your VO2 max can dip down in an overtrained state. So MRV is a real thing. Maximum recoverable volume is a testament to the fact that you can do up to an amount that you can't recover from, and anything north of that, don't do. Now, on the other hand, there's the minimum effective volume of if you don't do at least this much work, this number of sets per week for biceps, for example, you just won't get any gains. So all good training, all gains by definition, theoretically happen between your minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable. Even before this introduction of concepts, but definitely after, people have been very curious about roughly for the average person who trains, what does a minimum effective number look like? Is it 1 set per week for biceps? Probably not for advanced people. Is it 10 sets per week for biceps? That seems more reasonable, but maybe even that's a little bit high. What is the MRV though? What's the maximum recoverable? If I want big legs, I come to you and I'm like, Thomas, look, my legs are small. My girlfriend just left me. She laughed at me while she walked off, and I couldn't even run after her because my legs are so small. And I'm like, what do I do? You're going to be like, well, yeah, I should probably train your legs more. And then I go, how much more? Now, what you say to me after that can matter, because if you say, look, in my experience, 15 sets of quads a week, nobody can recover from any more than that. And you cap me at 15. What if I'm really slow twitch muscle fiber? What if I'm really just genetically amazing at recovery? What if I'm not that big and strong and like it just doesn't take many days for me to recover? Like you take Ronnie Coleman, you have him do some squats. He takes so much total muscle damage because of squats.
Now.
It's up. I should have used somebody else. Time machine to 2001. Ronnie Coleman does squats. He gets really, really sore because there's a lot to get sore, a lot of recovery to do. But if you got pencil neck McGeekstein and his quads are like Harry Potter size, he might be able to just recover a lot. You tell him 15 is the most you should do. He's doing 15 sets of quads regularly. 3 times a week he does 5 sets of quads. You're like, dude, how is it? He's like, yeah, it's pretty good. You getting sore? He's like, not really. Like, do you think you could do more and still recover? He's like, dude, for sure, I could double this and still recover. You're like, no, man, that's too much. So back in the day, it's kind of what we used to do. It was more of a colloquial understanding. Like, you see in the gym what works and what doesn't. And that understanding was biased by very strong, very muscular, very fast twitch people who happen to dominate bodybuilding, oftentimes with very good technique. When you use very good technique and you're genetically pretty gifted and you're enormous, you're going to be able to pound in so much stimulus per every rep. You just don't need a lot of sets to get the job done. And many more sets than that is just overkill. My MRV for my quads is sure shit not 20 sets per week. I would die. I might be 12 to 15 is my limit. Is that the case for everyone else? So what I used to think was roughly maximum recoverable volumes for most muscles are something like 20 sets per muscle per week. Any much more than that, and you're getting into the problem area of like you're over your maximum recoverable volume, which means by definition, you're starting to overreach, then overtrain, and then you lose muscle, then your joints are all f***ed up and you're just washed out. It turns out there's a huge exception to that. They have done a crap load of studies now where they've taken groups of people, able-bodied young men, that they give a certain amount of training to, let's say 20 sets per week. And then next week they go up and then up and then up, and they just keep going. And there's at least one study so far that it took lifters up to 52 sets of quads per week. 52 work sets per week. You're like, what? Here's the thing. It turns out that the systemic limit to maximum recoverable volume is a real thing. You can only train your whole body so much, and systemically it'll be like, dude, I need a break. You, I can't grow anymore. Get me out of here. But the local limit of each muscle is actually quite high relative to that. So here's what I mean by that. If you train your whole body and you're well trained, you take a few muscles beyond 20 or 25 sets per week, it's not the muscles themselves getting up too much. The systemic fatigue is so high, your body's like, dude, I can't do this. You'll start to get a lower desire to train. Your whole body's joints will start hurting, sleep problems. And if you pull back on that volume, everything gets better. And you're like, okay, I was just clearly doing too much. But if you train a lot of your body's musculature very little or not at all, let's say you're doing no upper body training, just legs, all of a sudden your local maximum recoverable volumes are exposed for your legs. Like, what's pushing the quads too hard? And it turns out that answer for most muscles, for many people, is more like 30 or 40 or 50 sets per week than 10 to 20. So that advice that you give to that kid whose girlfriend left him because his quads were small is now going to be quite different. He's going to say, dude, I'll do anything to get bigger legs. You go, okay, take your upper body training volume, lower it to 1/3 of what it used to be, which is now a generally understood rough guess at what maintenance volume is. So if you train with 15 sets for your chest per week to grow it, if you do just 5 sets per week, you'll almost certainly never lose chest volume until you turn like 80 and you're whatever, you're just dying, I guess. No offense, 80-year-olds. You have maybe many listeners who are 80 of this podcast.
That's my demographic. Can you tell?
Okay. You look great for your age, by the way. Like, I'm actually a vampire. I'm 105.
People, ever since I had kids, it was like after having, I don't think people realized I was pretty young when I started the channel. So like now when I actually look my age and I have kids, people are like, you're so old. You look so unhealthy.
Oh my God.
I can't believe how much you've aged. Well,
it's like, yes, it's been 15 years. Try having kids, damn it. So that kid that comes to you and says, I'll do anything for quads, you put him on 5 sets of everything, upper body, all 5 sets instead of the 15 he used to do. And now you say, look, start at 15 sets of quads per week. And if you feel good and recovered, you're not sore when it's time to train again, add 1 or 2 sets every workout to your quad workout. After a few months, he might be into the 30s and 40s of quad working sets and growing better than he would have at 15. Because when you take the systemic demands and you clear out some room, it turns out you can really jam per 1 unit muscle. So if you have a muscle, here's the big take-home point. If you have a muscle that you really want to grow and you haven't trained it with more than 20, 25, 30, 35 work sets per week, take some of the muscles in your body, lower them down to maintenance volume, do a third of the normal training you do for them, and start slowly gassing that muscle up. You can do this with one, maybe two muscles at the same time. You can get up to really high volumes, 25, 30, 35, 40 sets per week for some time until you deload, and that will confer significantly more hypertrophy than if you just stayed at 15 to 20 sets per week and you're like, guess I'm just never getting big arms. You could get much bigger arms if you really put in the work, but you have to constrain the rest of your body and listen to the signs of your recovery. If your arms are sore all the time and they never get a chance to heal, it's too much volume. If your elbows start to hurt, it's too much volume, and so on and so forth.
That's wild, man. So, I mean, what's most intriguing to me is, I mean, you can really back down the volume once you already have that clay mass kind of built. I mean, you can.
Huge.
Yeah, because that's me. It's like I go back and forth between like running so much, so then it's the leg volume is harder because I'm running, because I'm not recovered, because I've got this constant eccentric of running.
Oh
so
my
then
God.
I try to squat the next day and it's just not happening.
Sure.
So I'm like, okay, I got to wait 2 days. Okay, then I squat and then I can't run.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, my volume goes to crap.
Yes.
But I'm like, okay, well, I've got a brand to uphold. I got to look a certain way. Sure. But ideally, I'd be like, shoot, let me just hit a few sets of upper body, keep what I got, and like hammer the legs and just creep up that volume as much as I can.
That is absolutely how it works. I highly recommend you try it. Yeah. Cut your typical volume in lifting by a third. Stick with that for a few weeks or months while you really emphasize running. Get a lot better at your running game. And then you can always flip the script. You think, okay, I kind of miss lifting a little bit. I'm looking kind of like I usually look, but I could look a little better. I've finished, let's say you run a race, you finish your running goals. You know, like how it works. You got to take a few weeks of easier running anyway. Take the load off your hips, your knees, etc. You say, okay, for the next 2 months, I'm going to run at maintenance, which means I'm going to run roughly 1/3 of the total volume I typically run, which is a lot less, meaningfully less. And if you keep the runs pretty intense, you won't lose much of your running ability. Transiently, it'll go down a little bit, but it comes right back up when you start training a lot again. And then when you lower your running like that for a few months, raise your lifting a lot by, up by a third and then up by a third. And then you can get a lot of short-term gains that you can keep into that next phase, cycling the phases one after another. A few weeks of months of more lifting, less running, a few weeks of months of the opposite gets you a lot of the big green check marks of all of them, but you're at least a little bit of a specialist some of the time.
No, that's awesome. Does the sort of systemic recovery you talk about apply to like aerobic threshold training, LT1, LT2 as well? So, because
yes.
Okay, because I find like the instance of like URIs and like just getting respiratory issues when I'm running goes up so effing fast. It's not even funny because like we train together. I push it pretty hard. So I think that way when I'm running too, and I don't really understand sometimes that I'm pushing it too hard until I'm sick, right?
Yes.
So it's like. So they dip from the same bucket essentially. So like even if I'm running and lifting, that's systemic, but then maybe the localized operates on a different axis.
I couldn't have put it better.
Yeah.
I mean, my voice is a little sexier, so I could have, but other than that, I'm kidding. There's nothing about me more sexy than you. Do you typically get hit on by your guests?
Not like you. Yeah,
that's what they all say.
You're a first for me.
Gross.
I did have one, and
as a joke or for real?
No, for real. And they're not allowed back here.
Oh my God. Were you fellas in here?
Everyone knows this one. No.
Thomas is like, help me. They're just like, nope, the camera works well. Keep
exactly
going. You're the man. You're all on your own out here. That's really funny. No. Yeah. The systemic fatigue adds up from all sources. Another really cool thing is one of the things that leaks into systemic fatigue is overall life stress. Like your significant other yells at you. She says, I'm taking the kids forever. Typical Tuesday kind of stuff. And that stress can actually fill your cup of systemic fatigue. So where you go on your normal run after that, you get sick because you've exceeded your systemic fatigue abilities. Now, of course, you don't always get sick after, but you absolutely run a higher risk of getting an infection of some sort because your immune system is like a sword and shield army. It's busy fighting the volume, and behind it, it's this like whatever typical virus. It sneaks up back there, so you're absolutely at risk for getting more sick and having lower performances, even if the stressors that come in aren't workout related. So it's cardio, it's weights, it's combat sport, it's the tennis you play with grandma on Saturdays, and it's like your boss yelling at you at work. That all adds up. So sometimes if you have a big sprint, let's say you're doing some kind of work project and it's like night and day, you got to get it done. Take your training, lower it to maintenance volume. You will thank yourself. Because another thing that people get really wrong is they have this dichotomy of either I'm off, like I'm in the Bahamas, my butlers are smoking cigarettes for me because I don't want that smoke to touch my body, but I got to look cool for Instagram, and I just don't do it. Or I'm out here 110% fucking running on the freeway, hitting semis. The thing is, if you, during tough times, take your training down to about a third, you essentially lose nothing. And when you pick back up the next week, when the work project is over, oh, thank God, you can start ramping up your training like nothing ever happened. If you don't do that, if you're like, well, I'm still at work, I'm still going to train like crazy, you're just going to get sick halfway through that week. The work project is going to be tough to finish. You'll have to cut all of your training out for a week and a half and do that thing where you come back after a week and a half with no training at all. And you're like, what the hell am I even capable of here? You have to start rediscovering your body. You can avoid that if you just proactively adjust volumes up and down, recognizing the tacit fact that, yes, the total systemic recovery ability is limited. It's trainable. It goes up over time, but it's limited at any one time. And a lot of people don't have an intuition built around that, I would say. Me too. Hard. I do dumb all the time. Forget about it.
No, it's hard, man. I mean, especially if you're wired just to push it, right? I mean, that's just like, it's a really difficult thing to do. And when 100%. You're looking at like the life stressors kind of adding up on you, I mean, sometimes you're probably like me where I'm training as an outlet for those life stressors. So it's
like a challenge. It's like life. I'll life and I'll do my training. Yeah. I'm that hardcore. And it's like, God's not giving out hardcore trophies up there. Maybe he is. That's in a few years. While you're in this terrestrial existence, your body is a machine. It has a physical limits. You don't want to exceed them, and you want to know them. You want to push them for sure. But if you know there's just going to be too much in the situation, too much outside stress, too much cardio, too much training, my question to people listening is, what do you think comes out of that magic box when you excessively stimulate a system with too much stress? The answer is injury, sickness, or just having a bad time where you regress in your abilities even though you've done more work. Imagine this scenario. You cut everything down by a third. You lose nothing. You're at the end of the week, you start again. Amazing. Imagine the other scenario of you stick with the program and everything. I'm going to run, I'm going to lift, I'm going to do these YouTube projects. And at the end of that week, you're physically sick and your ankle hurts. Which one of those is better? Which one were you the tougher guy for choosing? Of course, the one where you worked all the way through. But your reward for being a tough guy is you have an upper respiratory tract infection and your ankle hurts so much you can't run on it. Slow clap. Yeah. You did it. Hardcore, hashtag no team, no days off. And you'll have plenty of time for hashtagging because you'll be on your couch Instagramming instead of being out in the world doing it. Yep. But if you willfully pull back, it's a decent analogy, I think, with no disrespect meant to folks actually fighting in combat. But you're an intelligent commander. You pull back your forces when it's time. You're not like, we're going to take this whole city. And they're like, look, if we just let these guys run out of ammo for a while, we don't have to rush into there. Nope, we're going to rush in. But we're going to lose a ton of guys. Why would we do that? It's just not smart. Smart leaders, smart military planners, even when they have huge, powerful armies, they push in, they pull back, they push in, they pull back. But us idiots are sitting there man, hashtag hardcore. I never pull back. I used to say I never pull out, but the alimony just got real gnarly.
On kidding. That note,
I've never been with a woman.
That was not this very, very, very last chunk, but this whole last chunk. Your last thing you changed your mind on. That is probably one of the most profound things that a guest has said that actually speaks to me, man. Because that's a really big one that I struggle with, is trying to find that range between that minimum effective dose and what do you call it? Maximum recoverable volume?
Yep, minimum effective volume, maximum recoverable volume.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's finding that sweet spot is, and also coming to terms with the fact that might be a very bio-individual thing. It might just be
hugely individual.
Okay with the fact. In fact, I mean, in the world of efficiency, it's kind of a freaking bonus if I can actually get by with less, right? If I'm efficient and it means that I can get the same performance outcome with less, then screw you. I actually can do it quicker.
It's amazing. Yeah. At the end of the day, training can be used for two things. One is getting results. Two is sharpening your toughness. What we want ideally is for that second thing never to interfere with the first. You can get plenty tough by training smart, by training strategically, by training knowing you have limits, and get a ton of hardcore mental work. But if you're man, hashtag never quit, It's like, dope, you're going really hard, but then you're paying for it. There's guys in jiu-jitsu, for example, I do jiu-jitsu. There's guys that can't turn down their rolls. Like when they do live rolling, live training, they can't switch down to a notch. And those are usually the guys that are hurt all the time. Like, yeah, man, my elbow. And then they'll be like, yeah, man, when I roll, it's 100%. Like, I can tell, you idiot. You would have a functioning elbow if that wasn't the case, and you would get more time on the mat and you would be better at jiu-jitsu. So do you come to jiu-jitsu to get better at beating people up, or do you come to cleanse your mind of demons? You can have both, but don't let the demon cleansing over your periodization. So if you have to lift and run to feel like a decent human being, make sure those are in a state of balance. You're not just doing a crap load of them all the time, because you just have inexplicable injuries and times you get sick. And then people close to you are like, I thought you knew what you were doing with all this stuff. Why are you sick all the time? And then you're like, because I push it hard, damn it. You won't understand. You know that whole meme where no one at the party talks to me, so I talk to myself? That's you, and just getting hurt all the time for no reason at all.
Yeah, that's been me before, for sure.
It's been me my whole life.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, where can everyone find you?
YouTube, Renaissance Periodization, or if that's too hard to spell, just YouTube, Dr. Mike Muscle, enter, and my ugly face will appear.
Yeah, you can't miss it.
It's really unfortunate looking.
Right on, man. Thanks.
Thank you so much.